Let's talk about what needs to be done. How can businesses be more sustainable? I've interviewed a lot of leaders in the space of sustainable business as a product of hosting the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation podcast. I've nearly surpassed 200 interviews so far. And when discussing the greatest opportunities for where businesses can become more sustainable, here are the 7 most common prescriptions that I hear. First, measure the carbon footprint. We've seen a lot of net zero pledges as of late, whether that's from the Amazons of the world or businesses of a much smaller size. The first step in going net zero, though, is to know what your current net is. And of course, we could just say that all businesses need to reduce their carbon emissions wherever possible, because they do. But the first step in reduction is in fact tracking and measuring how much you're emitting. As we've mentioned here before, there are organizations that help businesses to do just that, like Climate Neutral or We Are Neutral. These organizations also help businesses prioritize their reduction efforts. Step 3, for example, in the Climate Neutral certification process is to have businesses build a reduction plan after they've offset what they are currently emitting. Number 2, map the supply chain. For those of you who aren't familiar, a supply chain is a sequence of activities that allows a company to deliver its goods or services to the end consumer. Believe it or not, there are companies who can't claim to know exactly where all their materials have come from, or as well who touches them before they get to you. This is obviously a greater issue for companies who manufacture physical products. They might not know where manufacturers, who are typically abroad, get the materials to make their goods, or as well what labor conditions might be like. More ethical and responsible trade and labor practices begin with complete transparency. This is a major issue in the fashion industry. This is why the nonprofit Fashion Revolution created the Fashion Transparency Index in 2014. The Fashion Transparency Index reviews and assesses how much information the world's largest fashion brands disclose about their social and environmental efforts. They believe that the more information these brands are required to share publicly, the more effort they'll make to clean up their supply chain from a labor and environmental standpoint. I think it's valuable to hear a bit from my conversation with Ursula de Castro, one of the founders of Fashion Revolution, as to why it's so critical to create transparency in the fashion industry, or really any industry for that matter.
So at the end of the day, transparency doesn't lead you to sustainability. It leads you to a place where you can discover for yourself whether it is or it isn't, whether practices are best practice or not best practice. But the reality is that it's crucial to make brands understand that these closed doors mentality lead to rife environmental and human abuse, and that radical and mandatory transparency absolutely is what we demand, what we request, what can no longer be denied at this day and age after situations such as Rana Plaza, and yet again recently with COVID, when we have so much visibility of exactly and precisely how appallingly brands behave with their workers. So transparency really is for us all to keep these brands accountable, and then eventually to understand what a new set of information we need to have when we go shopping. So if you are just as used to checking if a brand has your size, but also checking whether they publish their code of conduct, you will develop better shopping habits.
Okay, number 3, reallocate B2B spending and advertising. Businesses spend a ton of money just to run themselves. Of course, there are salaries, but there's also suppliers, software tools, design, marketing, recruiting agencies. Businesses spend a ton of money every single month just to make their operations run. The business-to-business, B2B, economy is actually larger than the business-to-consumer, or B2C, economy. It's important to know not just what product a business delivers to the retail shelves, but also what they did and who they spent money with to get it there, right? This is why the B-Impact assessment, which we've mentioned here before, asks businesses as to whether or not they screen or evaluate significant suppliers for their social and environmental impact. If a business takes an analysis of every single company that they spend money with, they can see as well what other values, ethics, and practices that they're supporting with their month-to-month spending. Let's take a look at an example here. In 2020, Patagonia decided to pull all their advertising dollars from Facebook. In a recent statement, CEO Ryan Gellert stated, "Patagonia stopped all paid advertising on Facebook platforms in June 2020 because they spread hate speech and misinformation about climate change in our democracy. We continue to stand by that boycott 16 months later. Because that they believe Facebook's business practices are disruptive and corrosive, Patagonia has since gone on to call on other companies to do the same, divest advertising dollars from Facebook. Patagonia acknowledges the impact of where they spend their marketing dollars, not just from the number of sales it produces, but as well who or what that says their brand is supporting. Number 4, pay workers a living wage. By definition, a business cannot be sustainable if its employees cannot live off the wages that they make. If a business can't afford to pay living wages, then they might need to change their business model. In the US, as a direct result of low wages, public assistance programs spend roughly $152 billion per year. Poverty is expensive. It's expensive both for the individual experiencing it and the community that they live in. We can't expect to get people to care about things like climate change and living more sustainably if they can't afford the basic necessities for themselves and their families, while they're also working a job. As Paul Hawken, environmentalist, entrepreneur, and author of the book Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, says, "The climate crisis is not a science problem, it is a human problem. If we are going to engage the bulk of humanity to end the climate crisis, the way to do it is counterintuitive. To reverse global warming, we need to address current human needs, not an imagined dystopian future." And for every $1 per hour raise that those in the bottom 60% of earners receive, spending on government assistance programs decreases by roughly $5.2 billion. Raise wages, make public spending more effective, and allow people to think about more than just meeting their own basic needs. Number 5, take responsibility for end of life. This should be the standard. Businesses who are manufacturing physical products should be considering what happens to that product after its useful life is over. The majority of waste is created when we don't reuse the materials that we've already used the energy and resources to manufacture. This is why single-use plastic is so bad. Plastic is an extremely durable material, and once created, it can potentially have a long, useful life. But used once and disposed of, that plastic will most likely just end up in an inefficient recycling process, the landfill, or the ocean. Mud Jeans, a circular denim company based in the Netherlands, created a Lisa Jeans model to state that they, the company, are ultimately responsible for the product, the end of life of the product, when the consumer is done with it. And our friends at Preserve have begun to create products from plastics that have been reclaimed from waterways and ocean coastlines. They're taking responsibility for the end of life for products that weren't even theirs. Number 6, be transparent. Very transparent. The most sustainable businesses that I know of are extremely transparent and as well extremely diligent in publicly documenting and sharing their social and environmental efforts. If you researched enough of these companies, and I've certainly researched over 1,000 of these, you start to see who stands out. A Good Company, a Swedish sustainable e-commerce company, has mapped out every single one of their factories on an interactive map. And they've as well documented in great detail how they procure the materials that they do to produce their products. This is all easily accessible for anyone and everyone, as it should be, on their website at agood.com. And number 7, don't advertise, but advocate for change. And lastly, a bit more intangible, but extremely important in principle, businesses need to see these movements towards more sustainable practices as an essential, absolutely critical change for the good of the planet, not a marketing opportunity. This all connects to what we've discussed here before. It's extremely important to define who a sustainable business is and what a sustainable business does, because otherwise, if left undefined, these sustainability terms can be co-opted purely for the sake of selling more product. Businesses on a path to sustainability shouldn't scream, "Hey, look how sustainable we are." Instead, businesses should use their marketing and communication strategies to do what we've described here above. Take responsibility, measure, trace, improve, and report on what they can. Be transparent, and document and share publicly the progress that they make. And in turn, by being a true voice for change and not just another timely marketing campaign, I do believe that these businesses will as well be rewarded by the marketplace. At some point, sustainable business will just be business. It kind of has to be for the sake of our planet. While this may seem like a behemoth of a task, there are plenty of bright spots to point to. Finding these bright spots, has been one of the most rewarding joys of doing the work that we do here at Grow Ensemble. And thankfully, we're seeing more of these bright spots every single day.